I never expected my life to change so dramatically at age 25. For most of my life, I believed my parents died in a hiking accident when I was 3. I was raised by my mom's sister and her husband in a small town in Oregon. Let's just say my childhood wasn't great. My adoptive parents always favored their own kids, my cousins Zara and Marcus. While they got to join sports teams and hang out with friends, I was basically kept under house arrest, only allowed to go to school and back home. My aunt was particularly harsh with me. There were times when her discipline left marks that I had to hide at school. The worst was when she pushed me down the stairs and I broke my arm. At least my uncle drove me to the hospital that time, though he made up some story about me being clumsy. The only bright spots in my life were my dad's brother and his wife. They would visit during holidays and family gatherings, and they always seemed to notice when things weren't right. They'd pull me aside, ask if I was okay, and give me small gifts or money that my aunt and uncle didn't know about. Looking back, I guess they were trying to help in their own way, even though they never directly confronted my aunt and uncle about how I was treated. I managed to get away for college using a trust fund that was apparently set up after my parents died. I moved 3 states away to Montana and started studying architecture. I was in my final year when everything I thought I knew about my life turned upside down. I was working on a project in my apartment when someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, I found my uncle and his wife standing there, the ones who had always been kind to me. They asked if we could talk, and we sat down on the porch steps since it was a nice spring day. What they told me next made me feel like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. They weren't my aunt and uncle at all, they were my parents. They hadn't died in any accident. They had given me up when I was 3 because they were struggling financially and couldn't take care of me. My aunt and uncle had wanted another child but couldn't have one, so they took me in. I couldn't process what I was hearing. These people, who I'd known my whole life as my aunt and uncle, who had watched me get mistreated for years without doing anything about it, were actually my parents? I didn't want to hear their explanations. I just told them to leave and went back inside, slamming the door. They kept knocking for a while but eventually left. My roommate found me later, completely broken down. She sat with me for hours while I tried to make sense of everything. But before I could even begin to process it all, my aunt sent me a message on social media. She was furious, saying I was being cruel to my real parents by not letting them explain. I wanted to block her, but she still had some control over my trust fund, so I couldn't risk it. The next day, my mother, it feels strange even calling her that, sent me a long message explaining that they had hit rock bottom financially when they gave me up. My aunt and uncle had wanted another child but couldn't conceive, so they thought it would be the best solution for everyone. What they didn't explain was why they stayed away even after their financial situation improved, or why they watched me suffer for all those years without stepping in. I spent the next few weeks just trying to keep myself together. My grades started slipping, and I could barely focus in class. Thankfully, my roommate convinced me to see a counselor at the student health center. Dr. Sarah turned out to be exactly what I needed. Someone completely removed from the situation who could help me sort through my thoughts. Together, we came up with a plan. First, I needed space from everyone to clear my head. I called my aunt and uncle, the ones who raised me, and told them I needed some time without contact. They weren't happy about it, but they agreed, probably because they knew they might lose access to me completely if they pushed too hard. I met my birth parents for lunch at a quiet cafe near campus. They were more understanding about my need for space, which made me feel both better and worse. Better because at least they respected my feelings, but worse because it reminded me they could have been there all along. During that lunch, I brought up something that had been nagging at me. I wanted a DNA test. If they were lying, I figured they'd resist, but they agreed immediately. We ordered test kits from a reputable lab, and I felt a bit of relief just taking that step. The trust fund situation was more complicated. I'd always been told it came from my dead parents, but now I was starting to question everything. When I asked about it, they admitted it actually came from my grandfather. He had been wealthy and set up trusts for all his grandchildren before he passed away when I was 8. I had fond memories of him. He was one of the few people who treated me normally during family gatherings. This revelation just added another layer to my anger. My birth parents had basically taken credit for my grandfather's generosity to support their story. Plus, if they got their financial stability back through their inheritance when my grandfather died, why didn't they come back for me then? I was only 8, plenty young enough to adjust to a new life. My counselor helped me work through these questions during our sessions. She pointed out that while my birth parents' choices were questionable, I didn't have to decide right away how I felt about them. I could take time to process everything without feeling pressured to either forgive them or cut them off completely. Meanwhile, I started gathering all my important documents and personal belongings from my aunt and uncle's house. I didn't want them to have anything they could use to maintain control over me. My roommate helped me make lists of everything I needed to collect, from my birth certificate to childhood photos to school records. I knew I'd have to go back to their house eventually to get it all, but I wanted to be prepared when I did. The DNA test results came back about a week later. They confirmed what their immediate agreement to testing had already suggested. They were definitely my biological parents. Even though I'd been expecting it, seeing those results in black and white hit me hard. I spent that entire night sitting on our apartment's fire escape, trying to reconcile my childhood memories of them as my kind aunt and uncle with the reality that they were my parents who had chosen to watch from the sidelines while I was mistreated. The next month was intense. I started seeing Dr. Sarah twice a week because the stress was getting too much to handle. She helped me recognize that I was dealing with depression and PTSD from both my childhood abuse and this new revelation. Once I confirmed they were my real parents, I focused on getting full control of my trust fund. I hired a financial advisor who helped me transfer everything into my name. At least that gave me one less thing to worry about. My aunt and uncle couldn't use money to control me anymore. When I finally felt strong enough, I sat down with my birth parents to get the full story. They explained that after my grandfather died, they had considered taking me back. But since I was 8 by then, they worried that moving me would be too disruptive. Part of me understands their logic. I had friends at school and a routine, even if it wasn't great. But another part of me thinks that's a weak excuse. They could have at least told me the truth then, or found ways to be more involved in my life. One afternoon, while sorting through old photos at my apartment, I found pictures from family gatherings where they were right there, standing just a few feet away from me. In one photo, I even had a bruise on my arm that I remember getting from my aunt, and they were smiling in the background like everything was fine. Those photos made my decision clearer. I've decided I can't forgive them, at least not now. Maybe someday, but not when the wounds are still so fresh. They had countless opportunities to step in and protect me. Instead, they played their roles as the nice aunt and uncle who visited occasionally, while letting me believe they were just extended family who felt sorry for the orphan nephew. The hardest part is that I still want parents in my life. I never had real parental figures. My aunt and uncle were more like prison guards than parents, and my birth parents were just occasional visitors. Now that I'm an adult, there's this part of me that wants to try building some kind of relationship with my birth parents. Maybe not as mom and dad, but as something. But then I remember all those years they watched me suffer and did nothing. I think about how they let me believe they were dead, rather than just telling me the truth. Every time I start feeling like maybe I should give them another chance, those memories come flooding back. My counselor says these conflicting feelings are normal, and I don't have to make any permanent decisions right now. I'm focusing on finishing my degree and planning my future. The trust fund means I don't have to worry about money, which is a huge relief. I've cut off contact with my aunt and uncle completely. They were toxic influences in my life, and I'm better off without them. As for my birth parents, I'm keeping minimal contact. We text occasionally, mostly just checking in. They respect my boundaries and don't push for more, which I appreciate. Maybe that's a sign they've grown and changed over the years. Or maybe they just feel guilty. Either way, I'm taking things one day at a time. Life isn't perfect, but it's getting better. I'm learning to trust my own judgment and build the life I want, not the one other people choose for me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd made different choices all those years ago, but I try not to dwell on it. I can't change the past, but I can control what happens next. My story isn't over, but at least now I'm the one writing it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.